Welcome back. In this video, we are going to make a couple of changes to our application, allowing us to edit and delete the entries. Okay, therefore we will need to set up these two methods, update record dialog and delete record dialog. I'm going to go over those in this video, and there's a lot happening there, so it will be a longer video. And the general goal is to, well, pass them to our item adapter. Let me see. So to the item adapter here, because in the last video we uncommented this item adapter stuff that we had prepared before. So this update listener as well as this delete listener. So let's put them back in, and let's put this update listener invoke back in as well, and this one. So we're going to invoke the method that we will use as a delete listener, which will be some sort of a it will be a lambda, right? It will be a anonymous function, and we're going to invoke that anonymous function passing the ID of the individual item that we're currently at in order to then allow to click on the update and the delete buttons. So let's go ahead and implement those methods, and therefore we will need to make a change to this item adapter. Don't be confused about the video not having this stuff here, because as I said, I cut the video a little bit. So the video is going to lack this stuff, but we are going to have to now implement everything that we need to add to the item adapter for it to work. So let me comment this out for now. We are going to implement it in this video, however. Okay, so let's get started. So let's set those two up. Therefore, I'm going to comment this out for now, and let's prepare the update record entry. So let's create this function, update record dialog, which is going to be internally then updating our data. So we need to get the ID of the item that we want to update, and we need to get the employee DAO in order to make changes to our database. Because the employee DAO, as you recall, has all of these functions like insert, update, delete, and so forth. But in order to get access to it, we need to get the employee DAO object. So we are going to use an update dialog, which is just going to be a dialog object. Okay, a dialog with the context of this, and it's going to use the theme dialog style. Okay, so there's this style inside R. And let's see, theme dialog. I think this one would be good. Theme app compat dialog. And we need to import the dialog class for this to work. Okay, now let's set up this update dialog. So let's give it a property of set cancelable. So set cancelable, which is this one. And we're going to say that this is not going to be cancelable in the sense that you cannot click away from it. So if you want to update, clicking next to it will do nothing. Only once you click on the update or the cancel button. Okay, so we say set cancelable false. And now we need to set up the binding object. So binding will be our dialog update binding. And we inflate our layout inflator here. So basically we're saying, I want to use this dialog update XML file, this one here. And because we're using view binding, we can access this XML file using the name of the XML file binding. And then we can inflate it with the layout inflator. Now we can use this dialog binding or this XML file that we just looked at to set the content view. So we're saying binding.root. So what's happening here is, if you look at it, it just sets the dialog to appear or to look like this XML file. So like this design here, which we have created, which has this update record, name, enter name, and so forth, because we want to be able to edit it, right? Okay. So now that we have set up how this dialog is supposed to look like, let's take care of preparing our data. So when we click the update button, you see that the added texts are populated. So they're not empty. We're not saying updated with a new entry. We're saying it updated with what we have in the entry already, and now you can make changes to it. So that's how a good update functionality would work. Of course, you could also not populate those two, but I want to populate those added texts with the data that is inside of the database for that particular position. So how do we get that? Well, we can use our lifecycle scope again, because this is stuff that has to run in the background. So we need to use coroutines here. So we are inside of this coroutine scope, and we can now use our employee DAO to call its methods. And I'm going to call the method that will give me a particular entry. So I'm going to get the employee by its ID, by passing the ID and collecting the data. So I'm using the collect method here, which I can then get the data from our binding object. So binding dot edit text update name dot set text, and I can set the name here. Okay, so let me see. So this collect method should give me the it. If that's not the case, then I'm doing something wrong here. Let me check. So employee DAO fetch employee dot collect. Now, okay, so it was just an error there. I don't know, maybe I misspelled something. But now you see we get it, which is the employee entity. So this is a lambda here. You see we get the employee entity, which is our employee object. So if you look at it, it gives me the name of the employee entry. Okay, so now let's do the same thing with et update email ID. And this one will be also the set text. And here we need to use at or it email. Okay, so we're now assigning the email as well. Okay, so this is where we are populating the data here. So this information into the added text. So now let's add what should happen once we click on the update button, this one here. So let's use our binding object again. Dot TV update dot set on click listener. So once we click on the update button, we want to execute some code, and this is the update button, which is not really a button, it's a text view, but it's fine. I called it TV update, which is a text view update, which is this one here. So if you look at the ID, it says TV update. Okay, so now here we can now get the name from those. So we need to get this value, we need to get this value. So we get those from the added text, right? So the name, we get it from our binding dot et update name text to string. And the same thing for the email. So email will be binding dot et update email ID dot text to string. So we get the text and we make a string out of it because that's what we want to store inside of this email variable. So now we can check if those two aren't empty, because if the user for some reason entered an empty entry, then we don't want to do anything. So if name is not empty and our email is not empty, only then do we want to store something. So only then do we want to do a similar thing as we did with the create method. You recall here where we inserted something and we need to close the dialog at this point. But here you see we use the employee DAO to insert the employee entity with the name and the email. So let's do something similar here. Let's use our employee DAO, but of course, this is again stuff that has to run in the background. So use a coroutine again. So here, let's use our employee DAO to call the update method. And this update method needs to an employee entity. Okay, employee entity object with the ID that we want to change, the name that we want to change, and the email. So here you see the name and email is not enough. We need to pass the ID as well because we want to only update one particular item. Because if you look at the update method, you see, well, you don't see much. It's just an employee entity that we need to pass, which has those values. So when you're creating, you don't need to add the ID because the ID is generated for you automatically. But when you're making changes, you need to pass the ID. Okay. So why are we doing all of this update stuff before even displaying the data? Well, the problem is we can't display the data because our adapter uses the update stuff as well. So if we would have not used the update listeners here, it would have been a lot easier. So if we were to comment these two out and comment this part out here, we could get the data without doing the update stuff. Okay, but we're doing everything at once, so let's look at this. So here we have the employee DAO. We now update the entry, And now let's also let the user know that we updated the record. So we're just displaying it via a toast. And let's make sure that the dialog that we have just opened is going to be dismissed, because it's super annoying if you have to update and then cancel to close the record. So we want to dismiss the dialog as well. And if they are empty, so if either of them is empty, I'm just going to have this else block here, which is going to display name or email cannot be blank. Okay. And now you see we have two buttons. So we have the update and the cancel button. Now let's also implement the cancel button. So let's say binding.tv cancel. So once we click on it, which means we need to add an on-click listener, let's dismiss the update dialog as well. And of course, what's super important, we need to show the update dialog at all. Okay, so this method will never be called because we are not setting up the data into our recycler view, so we cannot test it until we have displayed everything. So that's our update record dialog. Now let's look at how we can have a delete dialog. Okay, it will be very similar, because if you look at it, well, it's just this very basic dialog here, super simple, yes, no, delete record, but it also needs to have the ID. It needs to know which ID we want to delete. So let's create it, fun, delete record alert dialog. So we're using it an alert dialog this time and not a custom dialog that we created manually. So we had this record update record dialog that we created based on our own XML file. But here we're not using that. We're just using a default alert dialog. So we need to pass in the ID, which is of type integer, and we need to pass in the employee DAO in order to, well, then be able to make changes to the database. So let's create the builder object, which will be the alert dialog builder with the context of this. Then we need to set the title. So set title, which will be the delete record title, which you see here, delete record. This is the title. And then I need to set the positive button and the negative button. So this is the negative button, this is the positive button. So let's set those up. So use the builder dot set positive button, and here we need to say which text it should display. So I'm going to say yes, and now we can use this lambda in order to first of all get the dialog interface here. So if you look at it, we get the dialog interface as well as another entry. I'm not going to use that. So this will be the lambda that I'm going to use. And now I can use my lifecycle scope, launch it again, because here we're actually going to do the delete thingy. So once we click on the yes button, then we want to delete. So here I'm just going to use employee DAO and delete the employee entity at the current ID. So that the ID that we get from calling the method. So we pass the ID to the method itself. And then we can also let the user know that we made the change, that we deleted this. So we make the text here, we delete it. And we need to show the toast. And then we also want to make sure that we close the dialog interface. So now if we click the no button, then I also want to dismiss the interface, the dialog. Okay, so here builder set negative button, I'm going to say no. I'm going to get the dialog interface and the which I'm not using, so we can use the underscore here as well. This is the lambda expression that I'm using, and I'm dismissing the dialog here. So if we click on no. So now that we have set up the alert dialog builder, so this builder, we can now set up the alert dialog itself, which is going to be of type alert dialog, and I can do it like this. I can use my builder and call the create method, which will now create the alert dialog. And now I'm going to make this alert dialog also not cancelable. So set cancelable to false, and then let's display the alert dialog. So show it, otherwise it won't do anything. And now this function, we can make it private because no other class can use it anyways, or should use it, because they wouldn't have an employee DAO, I guess. And the same goes, by the way, for the update record. So private fun update record dialog. Okay, so now that we have those methods ready, we can use them in a setup list of data into our recycler view. So if the employee list is not empty, let's set up our item adapter. We have the employee list, we get that here. Okay, we get it passed to our method. So here, we now pass in the employee list. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a closure here where I get an integer, which is the update ID. So update ID, I'm going to use this lambda again, use my update record dialog, pass in the update ID, as well as the employee DAO. All right. And now let's do the same thing with our final entry, and that is the delete listener. Okay, so delete listener. Here it's the delete ID that I get. Delete ID. Again, a lambda. And I'm calling the delete record alert dialog. I pass in the delete ID and I use my employee DAO to now delete it. So here, basically, this entire code here is basically just setting up this item adapter. Because you see, if we look at our item adapter, it requires an update listener with an ID and a delete listener. So we use this ID that we're getting, and we're calling the update record dialog method, this one here, which will then take that ID and the employee DAO to update the current entry. And the same goes for the delete ID. So we use that here as well to then delete the entry using the delete record dialog. So the dialog itself takes care of the deletion, which only happens once we click on the yes button. Okay, so now that we have the item adapter, okay, at this point we are going to implement these things as we had done before. So just make sure that you have the item adapter with the correct settings here and set up all of this binding stuff. And also just quickly, because I'm not sure whether I explained it correctly. So this here is basically, we are creating what we need to pass to our item adapter, which you see is an update listener. That is a function that returns nothing. Okay, so we're basically creating this function call of like an anonymous function here where we use the update ID that is given to us. So we are getting the ID and we're making sure of that up here. So where we are invoking it with the ID. So the update ID, the same goes for the delete listener ID. So we are invoking, when we click on the items, we are invoking this method, which then invokes or calls the update record dialog method. And it takes the update ID that we get from our item adapter when we invoke it for the specific line that we're currently looking at. Okay, so that's what's happening here with this line as well as with this one here. Okay, now let's test this application and see what it's gonna look like. So we see here we have our dennis@info.com, and I can now delete the entry. You see it's gone. So now let me add another entry here again, add record, and click on the edit button, which unfortunately doesn't work correctly yet. So we have this update window which opens up, but it's not working correctly. So we are going to create our own style for that. So I'm in the themes folder now, and I unfortunately have to create my own style because otherwise it doesn't seem to work correctly. So the style that I'm going to use, and this is really just the last part that we need to add to this video, then we're done. I'm going to call this one theme dialog. Okay, and the parent of it will be the theme overlay appcompat.dialog. Okay, and now the style will have an item name of Android with major, let me see, it's called Android window min with major. Okay, so Android : there's a property called like this. And I want to set that value to 90% because I want to make sure that it takes 90% of the width of the screen. And the minor should also be 90% of the screen. So I want to make sure that this dialog is going to take 90% of the screen width. Otherwise, it's just not going to look correctly. So now we just need to use this theme dialog that we just created. So our style theme underscore dialog, the one that we just created, inside of our update record dialog function. And now we should be golden and finally be able to update entries as well. So let's go over here. Let's update this. You see now it's taking 90% of the screen and it seems to work. So the email address that I entered wasn't correct. So let's use the correct one or a proper one. Let's click on the update method and you see the update has been done. However, we still have one little, well, you could say security issue in our application. And that is once we do click on the update method, we're not checking if the IT employee entity is in fact empty or not. So let's just make sure that it really isn't null before we do the binding, okay? Before we bind the employee entity to our update features. So if we run this again now, then we should see, let me add something here, add this record, let's make a change, let's update it and now delete it. And you see our application doesn't crash, everything is good. And now let's make a change to this one as well, update. And now, well, not delete it, let's now delete it. And we see no records available. Okay, so now we have a running application which does all of the CRUD operations. I know it's been quite a bit that we had to set up. It's quite a bunch of code and we are using a bunch of concepts that we have not used before, like flow, like a bunch of annotations here using DAO and using coroutines a lot and room, and it's quite a bit. But the thing is, once you've done it once and you have the general structure for such an application, you can now easily extend it. And then the next time that you need to use a database, you can just use this as an example. Okay, so that's it for this video. Let's implement this into our 7-minute workout app.